All righty.
Is this okay? Yeah, this isn't still the practice session piece. It's actually the
We are live.
Okay. Yeah, we'll give it a minute. I'm pretty sure that we still have a couple people coming in.
Representative Sayre, how are you enjoying your a little break here from the legislature?
Very much. In 2 words. Yeah, it's I took several days and have been re-engaging with work today. So yeah, it's nice to have caught a bit of a break here. I'm at a bit of a disadvantage today because my home office is being renovated, and so I may mute periodically because of what's going on around me.
Good.
I picked a great time to have all of my work in boxes.
Well, I assume now is an easier time than during the session, at least.
Yeah, it timed out. It timed out well, but and it'll be great when it's done, as all home projects are.
Yeah.
How's everybody else doing?
Fantastic. Gearing up for our last sort of substantive, although from lack of a better word, our last new content meeting here in a couple of weeks for the task force. So just really digging in. Somehow we're barreling towards October 31st here.
Yeah, it is. It will soon be upon us.
Feels that way.
Yeah. Well, I was delighted to see that the proposed moratorium on state AI legislation did not proceed in the big beautiful bill, because that really would have, well, it would have saved us a lot of effort. I think we would have had a very short report for October 31st.
Right.
Things to do in 5 to 10 years from now.
Well, now we've got more work, but probably hopefully more substance we can eke out of this. So I think we're just waiting on Michael and
Gotcha.
Sasha, right?
Yeah, Michael O.
Michael O, right.
Yeah.
No.
Oh,
There he is. I was about to say, he put us all to shame with his pre-work.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
Michael,
right.
you weren't supposed to, you're not supposed to show up while you're in the middle of being praised.
Oh, okay. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Yeah, welcome.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I think we can probably just get going, and then I'm not
Yeah.
sure when the session is able to sign on. Hopefully something didn't come up for him, but yeah, welcome back everybody. And I think welcome to Mike Dugay for the first time. I'm not sure I don't think you were on the first call of this little subgroup of the task force. But hopefully, if you all haven't had the chance to meet Mike as the commissioner for Department of Economic and Community Development, my boss, and yeah, so it's good to have him here. The plan for today is, again, not really a super fixed agenda, but I think just to kind of go around and see what people have learned since last time, and any particular ideas that are floating to the top for what this group might want to put forward for the task force as a whole in terms of what might be valuable actions that the state or other public actors, I think, could take around the topic of AI and Maine's economy. Any other questions or thoughts or things that you want to specifically get on the agenda for today?
Phoenix, maybe I'll just jump in quickly and just say from the sort of logistical side of things, less about specific agenda items, but I think we are, as I sort of previewed, we're sort of hurtling towards the over the past the midway point of this process, and so I think from our co-chair's perspective, I would just encourage us to start getting pretty specific and start thinking about how we can arm Sachin and Phoenix to go out and bring back to our co-chairs some ideas for them to chew on, and then we can, you know, take it from there. I think as we continue to have these conversations, continuing to narrow and focus is gonna serve us really well. So just putting in a plug for that.
Does anyone want to kick things off with any thoughts or things that they looked into over the last couple of weeks? I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I will if there's nobody raring to go. Go for it. Yeah, Representative Sir.
I'll jump in. I had an action item from the last meeting, and my action pales in comparisons to Michael's, but I'll deliver it orally, which was to look at what we're doing currently on the legislative front, that would actually have an impact on Maine's economy and specific to AI. And the answer is precious little at this point. I went back through what we had on out of the 2,000 bills roughly that were introduced in this past session. There were 8 or 9 that were AI related, and they were almost entirely sort of from a risk reduction standpoint. And relatively few actually proceeded to become law. There were 2 from Amy Kuhn that did proceed, having to do with let's see. I'm now not seeing those, so I'll skip over those because they're not really economy related. They're more sort of consumer protection related. But to give you an example of the kind of things that were introduced, there was a resolve to direct the Maine Arts Commission to study federal and national efforts to protect artists from copyright infringement by AI companies and users, and to monitor educational use. I'll skip a bill that was subsequently withdrawn. Resolve to study the effects of AI, cellular telephones, and social media on public education. Act to ensure determinations by the state are free from unethical, unsafe, or illegal interference by AI. An act to prohibit the use of AI in the denial of health insurance claims. An act to prohibit landlords from setting rents through the use of AI. An act regarding AI on campaign advertising. That was one of Rep. Kuhn's bills, which I believe has passed. I'm not sure if it's been signed. An act to ensure transparency in consumer transactions involving AI. So nothing really. The closest I could find that was in more of a promotional, supportive bill was one from Senator Bennett around blockchain and cryptocurrency, which has been amended to be something, and the original thrust of the bill was to develop a commission to look at how Maine could become a leader in blockchain and crypto technology. It has been amended with input from folks like myself to also look at the downside risks of crypto and blockchain and what's necessary to protect consumers. And that segues me to my last point, that kind of the big underlying piece of legislation that will affect the environment for AI in Maine's economy is data privacy law. And we have a data privacy bill that has been carried over to the next session, which is scheduled to begin in January. So that remains an area of uncertainty. The one other thing that I will add is a month from tomorrow, I will be in Boston participating in the NCSL working group meeting of their AI, cybersecurity, and data privacy multi-state legislators team. So that will be a kind of endpoint and start point for me to pull together the threads of what other states are doing around both the economic promotion of AI, as well as the consumer protection against the abusive uses of AI. So that's what I've got.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. That actually is very helpful. Even as someone who does, pay some attention to the legislature, I hadn't really been aware of all that. And you're right that I do think the Dan Matz, I just saw an email from Sachin. You're on it. Okay. He should be joining us. He's having an issue with the Zoom link, unfortunately. But just what I was saying, I think that, anyways, yeah, it's helpful to get that kind of overview because it's not something that I'm necessarily plugged into all the time, no pun intended. And I do think, though, that you're right, that the data privacy piece could be the big shift there, depending on how the legislature goes. And I suppose, I don't know how others feel, but it's not surprising, right, that most of the focus has been more on the consumer protection side of things. And not so much, is there something that we should be doing around the business community, the workforce, things of that nature. But I suppose that's kind of part of the idea of this group and this task force is to think through other things we should be suggesting that might be relevant for legislation. Okay, thanks for that, Representative Sayre. So since those have been signed into law, do you maybe just want to give a minute more on those two bills, if you don't mind? Just reminding us what those did. You're on mute. I don't know if that's intentional. Okay, sorry.
These are bills where the titles actually do explain what's in the bill. 1944 okay. Was I always forget the non-consensual intimate images bill, creating penalties for the use of that. And the Act to Ensure Transparency in Consumer Transactions involving AI was a bill that requires a notice or disclosure that a consumer is interacting with a bot, not a live person. When you're interacting with a chatbot, creates an obligation for the chatbot to identify as software, not a live human.
No, that's an interesting one. Okay. Thanks for that. Any thoughts or questions others want to share on this, the legislative side of things so far? Yeah.
Question maybe. Representative Sayre, I know you said you're going to meet with the NCSL folks in a month. Is there but I mean, I imagine there'll be conversation at that, but are there actions that you've like heard other states taking legislatively to help? I don't know, sort of, as you say, sort of in a promotional or an uplifting way to help sort of lower the barriers for companies to make use of AI, or as Phoenix points out, is it sort of what we would expect, which is let's figure out some of the protections first and then get to the promotion later? Is that sort of the mindset? I'm just, again, trying to think about specifics here, if there's a place that we could be leaning in.
Yeah. So what I know now is that I don't know that there is and there's a robust working group organized by NCSL. There's another robust working group that's kind of privately run and is currently on pause. And those the NCSL effort, which will be having its next regular scheduled meeting as a live meeting in Boston on August 3rd, on the eve of the NCSL annual meeting. that is where I expect to learn more about what's being done on the offensive side rather than defensive side around the deployment of AI. And what I can commit to between now and then is getting up to speed on what the team of the NCSL staff has done a really good job of assembling resources about the state of state legislation regarding all aspects of AI. And I recognize that I'm not up to speed on the opportunity side as much as on the risk side. So I will be digging into that prior to the meeting. So if there's contacts I can take advantage of that gathering, I'm prepared to do that. So that's my commitment to this team, is to read up on what we were doing that's offensively focused rather than defensively focused. I could talk about the defensive efforts in a lot more detail.
Well, it's good timing for us. I mean, that's not too far out, and I think still within the window. We could meet after that, and before reporting back to the overall group. So thank you to NCSL for their scheduling choices. Okay, great. Yeah, any other thoughts on that, or do we want to keep going around?
Yeah, Phoenix, this is Mike.
Yeah.
Just real quickly, I like how the representative framed that as sort of the offensive defensive thing. My sole thought on this is that I think what tends to happen is when new platform technology comes out, if there's not a larger plan that would otherwise like facilitate us going forward using it constructively, the natural reaction is to take the first several steps to put the genie back in the bottle, right? So the thought that I had, I think this is very timely that we're talking about AI as far as a state strategy. And I'm hoping we're at a good time that we're a little bit out in front of it, because like the representative had identified, it didn't seem like people wanted to regulate us into oblivion regarding the subject matter. But I kind of look at it this way: if we don't get out ahead of it, we may not be so fortunate the next round of the legislative body getting together, because if in the void of not knowing how constructively we want to use this in government and in business, I think it is a reasonable reaction for people to get nervous and afraid of it, and then sort of regulate and preclude other opportunities. So I kind of see this in two factions. One is, are we in a situation where we want to actually figure out how to use AI to our benefit and educate our businesses and our governments? And second, are we actually bold enough to actually figure out, do we want to be a master of that, actually create and control the content as best we can, understanding that there needs to be some downside protection, because there's going to be some other, unfortunately, not so above board actors. And so that's just really my only thought here, because I looked at it from an academic perspective. We were a beta site for OpenAI before ChatGPT really hit the commercial level at the school I was in. The first reaction, because people didn't know what to do with it, and they didn't necessarily understand what the benefit was, the initial surge was to put it back in the bottle and regulate the bejesus out of it. And I understand that reaction. I'm hoping we don't fall that same sort of down the same path here at the stakes. I think there's been enough exposure and discussion about it that if we can come up with a very good and broad plan of how we use it constructively, we might be able to get the legislative body behind us to help craft how we best can maneuver and take advantage of it versus just simply reacting to it, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Thanks. And welcome to Sachin. Sorry about the Zoom link issues. Not sure what was going on there.
Yeah, no, good to be here. I don't know. The panelist link didn't hit my inbox, and the other one was, I was getting a message, you are registered as a panelist, you can't join the general link. So was stuck. Anyway, I'm here now.
Okay, welcome. Yeah, sorry, that is frustrating. And I think that happened to all of us last time, and just down to one this time. So hopefully next time it'll be 0. Just a quick recap. Representative Sayre was sharing some of his, just an overview on some of the legislation touching on AI that did move through, or at least came up in this past legislative session. And there were 2 bills that did pass. topic, I think the theme overall is just that so far it's much more been on the regulation and consumer protection side, and then the commissioner was just relaying that it's important for us to kind of get ahead with ideas and plans for how to constructively use this new technology, since otherwise the instinct is to just only think about the downsides and how to try to regulate it away or put the genie back in the bottle, as he was saying. So hopefully I just recapped the last 15 minutes or so adequately for you, but we're just still kind of moving around in general discussion here. That said, does anybody else want to share any thoughts about what they were looking into in the last couple of weeks since the last meeting? Yeah, Michael, go right ahead.
Can I share my screen?
What do you think, Dan?
I think you should be able to now.
Perfect, thank you. So my research was on how AI startups can gain resources in the state of Maine and how they can elevate. This comes closer to home because this is something that we've had to do in order to elevate, where we couldn't really rely on investors because they weren't really that interested, and our revenue, while it was enough to keep our language learning app afloat, wasn't enough to create this elevation that we are currently doing now with African language translations. So I drafted a list of companies and organizations, investing groups that can be helpful for AI startup focused companies to tap into. I first want to highlight MTI. We have Emily on the call, but MTI, I can state personally, has been one of the best resources for our company and for many companies in the state of Maine. Basically, the genesis of this report is that it's going to take money from the state, money invested in the state to create in my vision, like a AI startup nexus, a hub for new startup companies to want to come and elevate here in this state. I think giving companies that care can be very, very helpful, and having the state invest into startups through the startups themselves, but also through organizations that invest in startups will be very, very helpful. And MTI is probably the premier example of that. MTI currently recently released a Merck AI program for free Corsica Gen AI courses. Um, MTI also has phase one, phase two, and phase three grants, as well as a plethora of grants that they give out, such as the Prime Grant. They recently just finalized a accelerator or a ecosystem grant as well, for matching grant funding and the life science incubation. So having the state invest into the Maine Technology Institute or institutes or create an institute that does what MTI does. But again, I think what MTI does is incredible because they not only provide opportunities for small businesses, but they also take risk, like they did with our company. Maine-based accelerators and incubators are also a really great idea as well. We have a few in the state. We have Dirigo Labs. We have Maine Accelerator Growth, Startup Maine. Um, they can help with having companies elevate their services and understand how to elevate the structure of their businesses, which is probably one of the most important things you can do as a startup. You have to understand how to be a successful business with utilizing as least money as possible. So understanding how to do your books, understanding laws, and how to get a good lawyer to create what you need to create. Those type of things you don't wake up and know. You have to have, usually how it is usually years and years and years of business experience. But having these accelerators teach these companies how to run businesses can save these companies tens of hundreds of, well, some really millions of dollars. Um, also, go ahead. Oh, was that me? Okay, never mind.
I think there's
Um,
just a little bit of echo there.
oh, no problem. I included also investment funding sources like Maine Venture Funding, CEI Ventures, Maine Angels, and Gulf of Maine Ventures. They can be helpful for companies. I find them though to be conservative. Um, they want an arm and a leg for no money. And, you know, for let's say main MVF, if they want to give like 100K, like for 10 to 15% of a company, like what is that? That's trash. If I'm being honest, right? Because for an AI company, just I can speak for myself in our company, um, GCP training fees can run to the tens of thousands per month, right? And that's just with training your model, utilizing NVIDIA to train your model. There are potential errors that you could pop up. So where I could potentially see a partnership with the state of Maine and these investment funding sources could be what New York State has done with some investment groups in the state, where they partner with these investment groups and create accelerators to help these companies learn how to elevate their businesses, learn how to connect with other investors, create a hub of other companies to connect with each other and grow with each other and learn from each other, rather than just pure investment, because that's not always the most successful path forward for these companies. Yes, money is very, very important for elevation, but also understanding how to run a business as well is very important, as well as the connection of a community with other AI companies. Innovation hubs like the Rue Institute um, are also very, very important. Um, Gulf of Maine Research Institute, that kind of falls in line with what the state of Maine can potentially do with investment funding groups to connect and create these innovation hubs. Could be really, really great. Another way that our company has been able to elevate were pitch competitions. We were able to really, it was our way to go door to door and pitch what we're doing, as well as free advertising advertisement for us, which was very, very helpful. So Maine Community Bank's Launchpad, Greenlight Maine, Top Gun, Big Green Pitch were all things that we did, which were helpful, as well as Dirigo Labs and Carnegie Community Bank pitch competitions will be very, very helpful for other companies. And then I thought of also partnerships with other accelerators outside the state of Maine. That could also be very helpful for getting companies from outside the state to come to Maine and want to stay in Maine. So partnerships with entities like Sputnik ATX, which are our only VC that has backed us. Google for Startup Accelerators, the state of Maine can have a partnership with that. Techstars, and that's a vast array. Finally, government support is also a really great strategy. Of course, I can speak personally to NSF. It's been very, very helpful with our elevation, but there are others as well. But it's not always the easiest to get these opportunities. A lot of times when it comes to the government, the U.S. federal government, you have to have a solid track record, or these application processes are very, very taxing, expensive, and tedious. So trainings or ways for the state to invest in entities that help strategize these businesses for applying for these entities, and um it's not just like, we see emails that go around. It's like, oh, learn how to do this, but you really don't. They're confusing. You really don't learn. It's just kind of a way for people to say they're helping when they're not. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like how MTI has funding to apply for National Science Foundation. They help provide grant writers. They help pay for the grant writing to an extent, not the whole thing, but they help pay for grant writing, and they kind of lead you towards the direction of success. Another plug for MTI being great. But ways for the state to get involved in having these government funded proposals to be helped, or for these small companies to be helped with applying for these federally funded opportunities. All this will help the state of Maine attract small businesses to come and provide their expertise in a greater um, ecosystem for AI innovation in the state. And again, of course, it comes down to money, but also helping these companies understand how to run their businesses.
Yeah, I gotta say thanks for putting all that together, Michael. It was really great. A lot of great information there. And yeah, especially I think, at least from my perspective, working for the state, we tend to look a lot at what are the options available within Maine currently. But I think you made an important point of thinking about, which makes sense for you and other actual businesses, is you have to look outside of the state as well. And, how can we partner with others to maybe have a bit of a Maine connection that is helpful for the folks here. But I think that's a key piece as well.
We kind of do with the Rue Institute. I mean, Northeastern is
Yeah.
a Massachusetts-based university, but they've come to Maine, and that's proven very, very successful for the state. Really, really successful for the state. So those type of
Yeah.
partnerships could be helpful as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's a good question too. I just thinking about supports. I mean, you mentioned a couple of things that you mentioned, obviously the money being the most important thing. You mentioned some training and technical assistance pieces. The other side of things that I think about that I think those two things are probably, I would imagine, are universal for all startups, right? Like you need to get money, you need to get training and guidance. I'm trying to like zero in on the AI piece, and I think about like data as the last piece, and you talk about needing to train your models and the cost of doing all that. And I'm wondering if that's another place where the state could help sort of with that piece. I think I may have mentioned this in our last call, but like the idea of curating data sets and putting data out into the world that folks like yourself who are, know how to use it could go out and then build something on top of is sort of still been kicking around in my head. So just wanted to put that out. Does that as like a support, does that pass the smell test there as a thing the state could do?
Potentially, data is such a big word
Yeah.
because it can mean a variety of things. And when you have companies like ChatGPT stealing data from all kinds of things, like what's prompting small startups who have little resources not to do the same. So it would just have to be, we would have to think of a strategic way for it to make sense and it to be in the favor both for the state, but also for these small businesses. But when you say like giving companies data, like
I,
that could mean
yeah,
so
I
many
guess
things.
totally. I think this is like a half formed thought. So this, maybe this is, but like one way is that the state already collects data regularly and does a good job of to varying degrees, does a job of sort of collecting, cleaning, and in some cases putting out into the world. And I think there's a push internally to sort of think about how do we continue to manage this in a smart way and continue to push this out. And like the example, just to make it really sort of concrete, in May, the Governor's Commission on Infrastructure Resilience released their final set of recommendations, among which was a recommendation to sort of collect and clean up and make public a bunch of data around flooding and how
Oh,
we
cool.
could prepare for potential future floods. Like we had those horrible floods a year and a half ago. How can we think about how to prepare Maine people to sort of prepare for that, to know like as much as they can about if they are in a flood zone and what that might mean. If that process is happening already, and that data collection and the data cleaning and data publication is sort of baked in a little bit with what the state is thinking about already doing, my thought is like, is there a connection to be tied with attracting businesses who might want to make use of that data that's already going to be out into the world? That's sort of the mindset here.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what the group thinks, but speaking from our personal experience, it would be great if there was some type of credit for training that could be connected with that, so that data can be processed and trained to provide resource for the state of Maine. Because again, it still costs thousands to 10,000s to hundreds of thousands of dollars to train these models. It's very expensive, and it's getting more and more expensive as these training mechanisms get stronger and stronger.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Dan, I think at least one of my takeaways was to think about the digital and technical infrastructure. And as part of that research, one thing that emerged is that it is beneficial to think about creating some AI sandboxes, in particular for the industries like the blue economy, forestry, rural health, which are specific to Maine. So there can be startups that can think about how do we come up with new product and innovation ideas, but there is data and sandboxes where they could deploy them, they can test them in a safe place, and also that infrastructure could be subsidized, for that kind of experimentation. So I think that I believe is potentially one thing that we should consider.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Just noting that down. I might build off that a little bit, because part of what I was thinking in, when I was looking, the topic that I landed with and talked about from the last meeting was about how to be reaching people already within Maine companies, and how are they accessing and understanding and training up on AI tools or what have you in a way that's helpful for them. And I can circle back to some of the other thoughts on that later, but one piece I was trying to think about is like, is there some way to have more cross-company collaboration at the employee level for learning these tools together, or even from companies that are a little bit ahead, even if they're not in the same industry, but the tool might be relevant across them. The problem with that is obviously, there's competitive reasons companies don't usually do that kind of thing. And similarly, if I'm understanding what you're saying right, Sachin, there might be something there as well, where there might typically be kind of a competitive reason to hesitate for, kind of offering a company's data in the kind of like sandbox environment for startups to utilize and run. But there might be something in kind of for both that kind of AI sandbox piece that you're talking about in terms of the actual data and model creation, as well as maybe a different way, the employee training part of it, where there's some way to create this kind of hub or center or nexus or whatever that is, a place for those companies that are comfortable and do see the value to their organization can kind of opt in and say, yeah, we do want to participate in this exchange. We will make certain information available and participate with other startups that want to, work with us and so on. I don't know. That seems like a big ask maybe for a lot of established companies, but thoughts are swirling in that direction, I guess. Like, how could that work?
Yeah, I'll share some thoughts on that one. I think, I feel like there are two very distinct things. One of them is the sandboxes and the data that the state can make available, but it could be made available to Michael, your point, with some kind of an NDA or preventive aspect, so that it's not like anybody can come and just crawl that data. Now it's available in OpenAI and Google Gemini and all that. So it's some level of protection there, but so it's helpful for startups so that they don't have to come up with like the data that you need for all the fishes that exist in the ocean, for Maine or the forestry, etc. So there's some like baseline that you can work on top of. If you have a new product idea, you have access to a sandbox that you can operate from. So that's kind of where it's coming from. I think to your other point about why would companies share best practices on AI, because there is a competitive aspect to it. So is there a way, but if they would, that'll be awesome, because there can be, people can build off each other and they can thrive. So I would say there are two examples of where this generally works well, or why that happens. One of them is the ability to brand yourself as a progressive company so that you can recruit the best talent, and you always want to show up in a progressive light. And I think if we create an environment that enables some kind of talent pipeline to be connected, like let's say early in career or folks who are graduating from key AI courses, etc., they would, the companies who come and share their best practices, it's a way to kind of socialize that with some emerging talent that would then like join. So there is some ROI there. So that is actually one reason I see companies are very, very willing to share what they are doing and how progressive they are. The second aspect is the connection with the open source community. So I think how we could create a culture of contributing to open source, and then the open source community has the ability of building on each other's work. Obviously, there is some aspect of it all being free, and hence the question is on how do you get ROI back for it for companies that invest and publish things in open source. But typically what happens is there is a licensing aspect to open source, that there is a freebie license as long as it's not for commercial use. It can be academic, etc. But if you want to commercially use something that has been put out there, then there is a licensing need, and there could be some way of commercializing that. So that could be another like policy consideration on what we think about open source policy and that side of the house. So those are two ideas that come to mind.
Yeah, great. Thanks for
Can I just,
that.
can I just put, just to make sure I'm understanding the open source thing right, correctly. So is there an example of like the public sector getting involved in that community in some way? Is there an example of leveraging or contributing to open source resources and technologies that the public sector has been is there anything like that coming to mind? I just I think it's a really intriguing idea. I would just want to make sure that we are going into this sort of clear-eyed about what the public sector can and can't kind of be seen doing and actually do. And I think that there's a compelling case to be made that open source resources actually align really closely with public sector goals with sort of appropriate guidelines built in. But just curious if you know of any sort of examples that we could potentially look to there.
Yeah, I don't have anything top of my head at least, but I can do a quick side research and see if I get some hits. But I just want to speculatively share some potential kind of things. Like it might be private companies, but I don't see why public sector would not be able to do it. So typically the way it works is that the domain that you want innovation to come into, right? So for that domain, you would seed something in open source community, like as an asset that others can build on top of. But if they build on the foundation that you have created, and then they need to use that foundation, right? So there is a positive relationship of that kind that gets encouraged by open source. And again, the commercial aspects come in. If you are really going to commercialize it, then at some point, there is that requirement that comes in. So the private sector does a lot of open source in that way, right? So many things are available in open source. Others can build on top of it. They can contribute to it. And then once it's getting commercialized, then there is enterprise agreements that can come into play and it can be commercialized. So let me check on the side if I find some hit there.
No, I mean, I think that's really interesting and almost it aligns pretty. It's a really neat way of describing the thing I was sort of flailing around before, of saying if we put out a pool of data out into the world, and then I don't know, figure out how APIs or other things could be sort of sat on top of it, and people could use it to sort of seed other ideas and other facilities. I think it's a really neat way of wrapping that up. So that's helpful to think about. Thank you.
So since we're about halfway through our time, Sachin or Emily, did you have more thoughts from your kind of in-between meeting work that you want to share before we bring it back to the open discussion?
Yeah, I could go next. I have, in similar fashion to last time, leverage AI to inform AI strategy. So I have a doc with me. I'll share my screen for a second so I can just share it with all of you. Okay, hopefully you all can see that.
Yep.
So as you can see, this is a AI infrastructure strategy, which is the subtopic that I've taken away for informing our AI policy for Maine. And I'll scroll to the so the backstory of how this got developed, just to give some context, is to say, let's research what's special about Maine's context. That's one part. The second aspect was research what all other states have done respectively to encourage innovation in AI or generally technology in their areas? Like what are the best practices that we can learn from that perspective? And based on that, look at what Maine has already been doing and figure out where there might be gap or an opportunity to take it further. So that's kind of the research. So this is like the lessons from the other states that came up. I'll focus more on what the outcome is, and I'll share the document so you all have it for consumption. And like this is the gap analysis on Maine, but mainly the recommendation is this, right? Number one is that we would want to enable a state-sponsored GPU cluster. Like you can think about it like an AI supercluster that is owned and operated by the state of Maine, and there we could enable like time-sliced compute cycles for startups in a subsidized manner. Like the cost would be near zero, depending on the area that they are looking to innovate on for state and so on and so forth. So there are best practices like this that other states have done that we could choose to do in the state of Maine, and it would be a huge enabler because companies would not have to come up with a way to do it on their own. So that's one part of consideration, and there is a proposal in the document around how we could fund it, what kind of capacity would make sense, and so on and so forth, which I think may need some more research and all, but it's a anchoring starting point to think about. The second one is creating a green data center corridor. I know we kind of talked about it, is that looks like Maine, we're already power constrained in the state. So creating like a data centers which need a lot of power is challenging. So this one in that sense could be a little tricky. But one nuance is that if it is power that is getting generated by renewable sources, and if we create some kind of a corridor that allows other like private companies to come in, that they can build green energy based data centers which can generate their own power or something of that sort, then that would be great, right? And we can have some criteria around like PUE is the power utilization efficiency, like if it's below 1.2, which means it's incredibly efficient. And there are some proposals of where it could be housed. Like that could be one thing that we could create. It would invite private capex, which is great, and it would create this new capability in the state of Maine. The third aspect was coincidentally, the topic that Daniel brought up, which is the AI sandboxes. So it makes sense. So Utah, I think, has a precedent, here of creating a sandbox for something specific to that state. So the three areas of blue economy, forestry, rural health seem like good ones where there is unique data, unique context of Maine that I think would be state sponsored in terms of creating those data assets. So there can be training data, there can be some AI models that are available for further innovation of products in those specific categories that we could like do and make available. Finally, I think like this is kind of obvious, like having an AI venture fund would be great to provide funding and seeding of innovative startups for ideas they might pitch. I think similar to Michael, you shared a bunch of thoughts on that. The other one is around broadband connectivity. So research suggests that we still have, the last mile. I think there was a data point, maybe it went up in the document, but there is, quite a number of households that still don't have good connectivity, which I think is important. So how do we think about licensing or getting high bandwidth connectivity enabled across the board, that would then get more and more people available to be able to connect and tap into AI driven workloads. I think we already talked about, like, this one is in addition to the sandboxes. It's about, can we have a data trust that is available, maybe anonymized. Again, it's about sharing the data, and you can have some criteria on who has access. There could be NDAs. There could only be the right kind of prospects that have that. And then there is some proposal around what could be like a timeline for enabling this, how we could measure like success for each of these areas, what could be the metrics that we could put in place, and drive that forward on a timeline, let's say targeting 2030 as the exit goal. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll email this document so all of you have a copy available directly to you. I'll stop sharing here.
Well, I said let's get specific. So that was the we went right to it. Thank you. That's great. Cool.
Yeah, great. We should get you and ChatGPT to write these kinds of strategies for all the sectors. I think that's really good. Yeah, and I think you do pull together some of the threads that folks talked about last time as well as this time, honestly, from Dan and Michael and others. Yeah, that's great. I think, and yeah, I mean, in part because it is so specific, I think I have less to say about it. So I think you did think through a lot of the different aspects of it.
Cool.
I think, I mean, I love the ambition. I think it's like a it's a big idea. It's a series of big ideas that roll up into something that's really exciting. One thing I'll just point out in the budget reconciliation sort of process that's ongoing is an additional. It's a $500 million infusion of broadband equity access and deployment funds specific to building out AI infrastructure. So if that holds on in the budget reconciliation package, I think NTIA will be distributing $500 million in funding to do a similar sorts of infrastructural investments as you're describing here. So something to definitely keep in our back pocket as the feds continue to prioritize these kinds of investments. I was thinking, this is sort of giving me flashbacks to some of the conversations we had around the Regional Technology and Innovation Hub process, which was over the last couple of years. We spent a lot of time thinking about different topics, but similar sort of frameworks of expanding out the way we do the economy here in the state. So really excited.
One of the points that you had on there that reminded me, Representative Sarah, I don't know if this one was in your committee or not, but just on the data center piece, from what I recall, there was some concern in the legislature about the energy load of data centers coming to Maine. To be honest with you, my sense is that Maine broadly is not in the most competitive position currently for data centers because of our energy just prices, if nothing else. But yeah, that piece around an incentive and actually kind of extending, but really not newly applying an existing incentive that the state has just specifically to renewable energy powered centers is an interesting idea. Yeah, I think that's clever. But am I right, Representative Sarah, was that there was something around the data center piece and the not specific about AI, but I think motivated in some ways by that.
There was, and I'm rapidly trying to find that bill. Well, there was a bill concerning the status of battery storage systems with regard to the business equipment tax exemption. That may not be what you're thinking of. That's storage, not generation.
Phoenix, I think that legislation was more a protective issue for one part of the state where there was a constraint on the grid. And in order to bring effectively Millinocket's redevelopment to full capacity at the old mill, if a data center actually jumped into the same town because of cheap land and clean water and available quote unquote power, the concern was that it would actually overtax and really strain the ability for them to develop out that certain site. So it might have been more of a protective issue only because of the fragility of our grid.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'll just jump in from the larger task force perspective here and just flag that we're having the governor's energy office do a little bit of a sort of report out on some of these issues. I think largely the conclusion I think that Phoenix mentioned is I think going to end up sort of winning the day. But the perspective here of if we were to end up positioning ourselves to and host one or more data centers, what does that look like in terms of the load that on the grid that, as we know, is needs some infusion of funding anyway to help continue to bolster it. So I think that work is ongoing and will be shared out with the whole group once it's sort of in a final or semi-final state. But the thought here of the energy dimensions of AI is that's why we have Dan Burgess and folks engaged in the work. So.
Emily, do you want to share any thoughts that you might have since the last meeting, and then we can bring it back around to general discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to briefly discuss the research that I was doing. And I just want to say I've really been enjoying all of this discussion. I've learned a lot, and I think everyone's prepared really well. So happy to share what I have. I don't know if it's on par with what Michael and Sachin put out, but I found some interesting things. And just to recap, what I was focusing on was existing supports for established businesses, not necessarily interested in developing their own AI product or technology, but how they can use the existing technology and tools to improve their own internal operations and become more productive and take advantage of all the great technologies that's out there. Whether this is a kelp farm, whether this is a manufacturer, they don't even have to be doing something remarkably innovative, but how can they use these tools to support themselves, and what kind of support exists within Maine already. Or at a federal level, and a little bit of a spoiler, there's not much currently. I broke my research into two different parts. One was looking at what are the resources available to actually help give businesses the knowledge to put AI in action, and then funding sources to help offset the cost of doing this, especially for smaller organizations that might not have as many resources. Looking at the educational and support piece, there seems just generally in the private sector to be organizations like Coursera and Udemy and Section School AI that offer pretty scalable educational opportunities that companies can subscribe to themselves to educate themselves on AI and also their employees. I also think in our last task force discussion, the University of Maine Systems was maybe considering putting together some educational courses that could possibly be used for other smaller businesses or larger businesses within the state of Maine. There's also consulting support within Maine. I know working with the Merck database, there are several consultants in Maine already. I think, Michael, you could be an example of this, of individuals who can actually work with businesses to try and implement some of these AI tools and understand how their own operations could be more efficient. So there are individuals who can provide these services within Maine to companies. And then there are also major firms like Deloitte and McKinsey who offer AI readiness assessments and implementation support, potentially for larger organizations that have that budget, but I know that probably isn't most Maine companies. In terms of funding opportunities, I really couldn't find anything within the state of Maine, maybe besides the Merck AI program. I don't mean to toot MTI's own horn, but we did put this program in place to have it be an affordable way for companies to educate themselves and their employees on the benefits of AI and how they can use it in their work. But of course, that's limited. If someone isn't really technically inclined, they may need some additional help, which would require outside expertise. At a federal level, I didn't really see anything, but there was an interesting example in Georgia, their AI in manufacturing, or AIM program, which supported AI-powered manufacturing, not so much in programming machines, but operations, logistics, forecasting, productivity. I think that started a couple of years ago. I couldn't really find any reports on its success, but I thought it was an interesting example of how states are supporting specific industries, not in the developing of AI technology, but how they can actually utilize the tools that already exist. In terms of other business support, there are several free webinars and conferences and events taking place throughout the state of Maine. The University of Maine had their Maine Artificial Intelligence Conference, and then the Rue Institute had their AI in Action Business Summit. So there are lots of resources, and SCORE, SBDC, they have a lot of free webinars to give information and learning for businesses, but not so much implementation for businesses themselves. So that's kind of the high level overview of what I found for support for businesses. Trying to get a bit more granular and looking at gaps that could potentially inform recommendations. I personally, in my own experience working with this Merck AI program, I found that sometimes businesses don't really fully appreciate what AI can do for them. So in order to take advantage of these opportunities, I didn't really see the educational push to say, hey, you can accomplish X, Y, and Z. If you explore some of these tools, you can really increase your output. You can punch above your weight. You can make the best of your small team if you explore some of these resources. So I thought that perhaps there was a gap really educating businesses on what they could get out of this and why it's worth their time and their resources. Similarly to others, also there is the lack of funding available. It always comes back to money to help businesses take these first steps and get the expertise they need to implement AI tools. And then again, echoing what others have said, networking, peer support, helping businesses see what's possible. You know, what is my friend doing? What is my friend entrepreneur doing in his business that might not be high tech, but I can use his case study and maybe apply that in my business? Or what is someone else in the aquaculture industry doing that's industry specific that can apply to my work? And then similarly to what Sachin had mentioned, maybe tools and resources potentially with a sandbox. Maybe that could be available to small businesses as well that just want to play around with what they can do, but are a little bit concerned about using their customer data or other data, as well as maybe recommended tools that businesses could use. There's so many things out there. What is the best? What's going to be worth my dollar and my time to familiarize myself with? So yeah, I'll stop there. That was the gist of what I looked at.
Great, thank you. Yeah, is that sparking any questions or thoughts in the group?
Yeah, Phoenix is as a takeoff of that, and I think it's a combination of what everyone has mentioned here. But if you look at Maine as sort of like the smaller sort of and could we actually advance AI constructively at a faster clip? A couple things come to mind. One is, what if in fact we actually do private vendors and literally worked with some people who implement these systems and small and said, if we actually just tried to compile 3 of the most powerful and sort of best AI tools, and then we sort of in fact worked with company vendors to get special price. So hear me out with this. I've often marveled after my 35-year career in Maine. We're just absolutely a small business state, but we do so very little for them. And the question is, could you actually work constructively and create an operating system? So effectively, you have an AI operating system for a small organization, and you push that out through different locales, whether it be through SCORE, SBDC, the EDD network, to literally get businesses trained up and sort of tooled in AI, and then basically those that actually want to use those tools to advance their effectiveness and efficiency. It's not unlike really the domestic trade program idea. Our business is actually way more effective. And it really is interesting. I think the comment was made that businesses just don't realize what they can do with it. But I will say that in my previous job in academia, the minute you expose them to it, and you basically can show them how they can have 5 Harvard level research people sitting around their desk, but you don't have to pay them and then back. People get pretty excited about it because they've never seen it in action. So that's sort of the one thing is like, how can you actually roll it out in a much larger experiment for small businesses that are interested? Second, how do you actually go about that sandbox approach? I think Michael might have mentioned this, but what if you just literally worked with Rue or whomever and said, we want to actually establish an accelerator? That's all its intention is to work with AI startups on the front end. People and entrepreneurs who have an interest in utilizing AI tools. Rue is in a job already in AI, but the question is, are we partnering them effectively to push that out to future entrepreneurs around the state, not just those that are enrolled in Northeastern and/or Rue? Thirdly, I think because we're such a small state, what would state government look like if we had a vertical where we just looked at and said, going forward, all your professional licensings in this certain category was just done through an AI experiment? Because I got to tell you, I'm not so sure we could get it more wrong than we may have it already. Could we actually speed up permitting? And could we make this absolutely one of the most friendly sort of business interactions from government to business that any state has. I mean, we're not New York or California. I think on scale, we might be able to actually do something there, at least in a couple of different areas. For me, it's always been permitting and licensing. I marvel at the fact that we're small, but God, it takes forever to get licensed in certain areas in the state as for a small business that don't have a lot of resources. And that's just my take. So those three things.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Just noting all that down. Yeah, I think that ties together quite a few of the ideas from earlier as well. The only thing I will add, getting back to my topic, I suppose, since the last meeting, I would say this is encroaching on the workforce groups territory more, so I won't spend too much time on it. But I was trying to look more into this kind of like basically incumbent worker training kind of world, and I would say really struggled to figure out what would be unique to AI in this kind of domain. Looking into what other states are doing, other suggestions, other reports, and so on, it tended to be a lot of like, variations on things we already have or other states already have, but kind of with an AI brand to it. So, accessing university or community college trainings, but with AI, retraining for workers who either need to get a new job within the company or whatever. We have a variety of incentives for training, either incumbent workers or new workers, community college, tech schools, and so on. I think, is there a brand new kind of unique category of tool or something that we're missing that relates to AI stuff in the state? I'm not sure we do. We might be missing some of the specific content or offerings that is relevant, but I struggled to really think of like what is something that AI kind of changes the game in that regard. With the exception of what I kind of mentioned earlier, is those types of programs might not be well suited for increasing learning for people kind of up and down the company ladder, in the sense that often they're kind of aligned more to entry-level workers, or if a company has their own kind of tuition coverage program, then maybe mid-level. But this kind of thought of how are we getting Maine's workforce across the board kind of up to speed on what tools they might be able to use in their current jobs. And it might be the fastest way to do that might be some kind of intercompany network, intercompany learning at the kind of networking level, as opposed to setting up a community college class for people at that level. So I think we'll probably need all that, but that was maybe one piece I was trying to think through. Is there some advantage in having some kind of coordinating networking organization or something else that helps bring people together who want to learn some of these new tools? And that does, I think, tie into these kind of sandbox ideas that we've talked about as well. I think those, I guess, Sachin, you were kind of saying maybe you see them as different, although maybe that's a slightly different topic, but I do think those things could kind of go together. Companies trying out the tools as well as the individuals in the companies learning new techniques that might be relevant. And maybe those two things happen at the same time. Maybe it's just the same kind of group of people or organization that is helping make those connections happen. But that is kind of where I was at. I wasn't blown away looking into what other states are doing on this subject. So it's like, well, we have a version of that we could kind of plug maybe more AI relevant topics into. But yeah, I just wanted to get that out there as we're going around.
Yeah, I just will share some of my observation on that topic. It's not an answer yet, but at least I think some practical context that might be helpful. So, and this is more like lessons learned from Vex kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
As if I were to focus on this problem of we have an incumbent worker like Apex, and there is a way in which we have optimized and standardized how the operating model works for various functions. Let's say for sales, for marketing, for human resources, right? Like all the technology, etc. So even if you take that existing workforce and take them to a classroom and teach them on AI topics and all, it's not like the usual. You don't get the eventual result of productivity. At least we did not experience it. So what is unique about AI, since AI is actually getting into the aspect of completely re-engineering how the work is managed end to end, because now you can get into the thinking and decision making, and to some extent even creative aspects of work. What typically really helps change the paradigm to a AI based paradigm is when you allow at least some portion of the workforce to treat AI as a contact sport, implying that hey, you have certain amount of bandwidth available to you. You just freely experiment with new AI techniques and tools in a safe manner, and there aren't like accountabilities with respect to productivity, but there are accountabilities with respect to you've experimented with a bunch of things, right? Which you can demonstrate, like okay, we tried this, we tried that, etc. And then things emerge through that truly are paradigm changing, that unlock like significant like change or productivity, and that might redefine how that function could work. So creating that environment and that culture is what leads to like real change and adoption on the AI side. That was the learning. How should we translate that into like a something that the state could enable for broad set of companies to improve overall productivity, GDP, like that kind of stuff? I think that still there's more thought to be put in there, but I thought I'll just share a bit of practically what I've seen like work on and not work. So like purely classroom training, it's helpful, but it's not enough.
Yeah, I totally buy that. Yeah,
I also
Michael.
just want to stress
Yeah.
too, these companies. Go ahead, Michael. Go ahead.
Sorry, two Michaels. Yeah.
Oh no, please.
So I also want to stress, like, if there's ways for these companies to get to the money quick too, like that's really important. Because you can't really hire employees, you can't really pay for things without that. So for me, that is also something that I'd like our subgroup to kind of also really instruct the state on, is like finding ways for these companies to find access to funding um, that allows them to have access to these training modules, to be able to hire employees to get trained. Like you can't train employees without paying them.
Yeah, let's note that down.
Yeah, Phoenix, but I was, it's spot on, brilliant. Because I think what really needs to happen, employees excited, they need to actually.
Kind of breaking up a bit there, Commissioner. Do you mind just taking it from the top again?
Yep. Sorry about that. I don't know if you can hear me better. But
Yeah.
I think what was said in regard to like the culture in a company, it's so much more important, because if you can actually spur digital transformation and change management in a sort of corporate and governmental culture, it just provides employees with a little bit more assurance that any skill that they've taken time and or resources to get is actually going to be utilized. And the last thing you want to do, in effect, from what my experience is, to excite the employees and give them new tools, and then they go into an environment where it's either frowned on or discouraged. And so I think what Sachin had said is spot on. And we have to figure out a way in which to push that out, to show by action that digital transformation, change management, at leadership and culture, it really is important. Not to suggest that that not having adult education and these other opportunities for training in AI in the field isn't important, but I think you have to go a little bit upscale to the higher part of the organizations and start to work there.
Yeah, I must say that totally resonates with me. And I believe Emily also mentioned that sometimes companies don't know that they can punch above their weight if they were to like adopt these practices. So I think there is some kind of like culture change or change management practices training or something that the leadership, like it's oriented towards more the senior leadership, so that they can drive adoption and change using leveraging AI could be helpful as an idea. But I totally agree with the thought shared, Michael.
Yeah, and that's so interesting because I know, having worked in with WEX in the past, you folks literally have positions with their titles called change management and transformation managers, and that says it all because it shows really an indication that that's part of the culture and part of the mission. And I do believe that that's a good start where we have to look at the top side and say to organizations and leadership, we're with you on this, and there's an opportunity here to partner.
So any other just thoughts, anything that hasn't come up, hasn't been addressed that we want to have in the mix for now? Just want to be sure we're not missing anything. Just gonna check my notes as well here. All right, yeah, we have talked about quite a bit, I would say, today. Question for you, Dan, Matt. Do you have any sense of what format would be helpful at the end of the day in terms of what we're handing back to the task force as a whole?
Yeah, I think the answer is to is that we do something like a bullet point with a sentence or two of explanatory text for each of the sort of ideas that we are coming up with here. And I'd direct us back towards those questions that sort of the task force has given their nod of approval on. Just as a reminder, I think I think we did a good job with this group sort of farming out a series of helpful questions for everybody here to go out and bring ideas in. But ultimately, those sorts of guiding questions that the co-chairs and the rest of the task force all sort of gave the thumbs up I think is the responsibility of this group to come back with pulling the ideas that we've spoken about here and slotting them in sort of underneath those questions with, again, a bullet point of an idea and a sentence or two sort of explaining what that means. And I don't think it has to get much more in depth than that at this time. I think we're still sort of puzzling through with our co-chairs and others sort of what the final product is really going to look like. But for those of you who may not have seen, I think next week we're doing a sort of briefing where one person from each group is going to go talk to the co-chairs and sort of say, you know, here's the early insights and early ideas that we're bringing back, so Dave and Mary have a good sense of sort of what the conversation is looking like and can help start to draw sort of connecting lines between a bunch of the different groups. I mean, we've already talked today a little bit about crossovers in education, with workforce, with healthcare. You know, a lot of the other groups are doing things that none of this is happening in a vacuum. So that's going to give us a chance next week to get all of the people talking in the same room. At which point I might have coming out of that, I might have more in the way of like, we need you to do X, Y, and Z. But I believe right now that's the format that we're going with, if that makes sense for Phoenix and for everybody here about what we're sort of hoping to produce ultimately at the end of the day here. Nothing super formal, but a list of sort of good, thoughtful ideas that help answer the questions that we've been tasked to answer. And I think we're, making extremely good progress on that topic. So does that help? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And that, right, since that is on Tuesday, what I'm thinking is logistically, we've gotten a lot of good ideas out here today, which was the exact idea. So far, I feel like that has worked out. So then the next step is, there's also a decent amount of overlap in terms of what people have discussed. So I think consolidating it down a little bit into those kind of sentence bullets as you're describing
Yeah.
And then probably just the way to do it would be to get something written up that then we can go over in a final conversation and just make sure that we're content that nothing is missing that's fundamental. And two things would happen in between there. One is we'll have this conversation with the chairs on Tuesday, which it won't be fully ready by then, but at least can kind of share the ideas. And I think the other interesting thing is that Representative Sarah has that meeting in August, so we might be able to hear what comes out of that before our next meeting as well. But yeah, Representative Sarah.
Yeah, yeah. So I just popped something into the chat based on what I've heard today, and it's just a rough thought about how we might bullet out what we're talking about. And I'm sure this is incomplete, and I'm sure this is the team to complete it. But thinking about 6 dimensions of an AI powered economy for Maine, 3 kind of inputs here: talent. We talked a lot about capital. Michael really articulated a lot of what's available or not available there, and quality of life as being one of the attractors of living in Maine. And then kind of the things that can either encourage or inhibit growth: our tax structure, our cost structure, which includes energy, housing, real estate, labor, cost of goods, and the regulatory structure, which, as I sort of pointed out, is currently, we're not doing much. We're not really doing anything that's AI specific. We have a lot in the regulatory structure that's designed to attract and enhance business. We also have a lot that gets in the way. But I offer those 6 dimensions as a starting point for how we might build out the framework to put our pieces in some sort of an order.
Nice. Actually, that might be good to pass on to the chairs as well, just as it might be a way to think about whatever end result here. I'm not sure how they're planning to structure it, but that could be a helpful way to break it down. So thanks for that. You're about to say something, Dan?
Well, no, I mean, I think a version of exactly what you just said, just that part of the goal here on Tuesday is to pressure test some of the big ideas like this, and to think about where we can sort of double down on things that are working, and where we can expand things that need to be expanded, and where we can help sort of figure out the things that need to be the I's that need to be dotted here. And I think this is a really interesting sort of structure in order to do that. So thank you for that.
Great.
Got one other
So
thought,
I'm just trying
Chair,
to
if
think.
that's
Oh, yeah,
okay.
go ahead.
Which is, as I think about this, AI is not the objective. Increasing and broadening prosperity in Maine is the objective. And so thinking this through in terms of, while everything that we've talked about has been great, encouraging the development of both attraction and growth of enterprises that actually pay family supporting wages is really that's the meat of it for me, as well as increasing our tax base so that we don't have to increase our tax rates. And what we could be looking at with our strategy is, how can Maine outcompete other states and countries in building an AI centric economy? And I apologize for the phone.
I completely agree with that. I really would like us to also focus on that aspect. I know security is important. I know protection of data is important, but I think our focus is how we can build our ecosystem for our state to make it competitive. So I agree with that.
I'd also like to add in regard to that is that this might be the most affordable moonshot that a state could really take. And the truth of the matter is, I think, unfortunately, in careers of economic development, we used to spend a lot of time, money, and resource chasing smokestacks that, just quite frankly, because of structural aspects, we're never going to be able to come to Maine. However, as it relates to AI and technology, along with a pretty robust broadband network throughout the state. This might be our moonshot opportunity.
Commissioner, I may come back to you when we're looking for quotes to pepper into our into our report here.
I love that.
We have
Absolutely
to.
love that.
All right, well, I think that's probably a good note to end on then, a moonshot opportunity. So yeah, we'll make sure, just if anyone does have written stuff that they jotted down over the last couple weeks, I know some of you have already shared that, but please do send that along, since that makes it easier for us to keep track and to consolidate info. So we'll take a stab at that. And likely we'll aim to meet probably early to mid-August, I'm guessing. I'll have to take a look at the schedule again for the task force as a whole, but I think that would make sense. So we can hear what the NCSL event turns up and go from there. Any last thoughts, questions, anything?
Appreciate all the really smart insights here, people, from this group. This is really exciting.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
See you later.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.